Welcome in, everyone, on a Thursday night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time to talk some Ohio State football here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. This is our Buckeyes show that we bring you each and every week live with these gentlemen. Right next to me on the top is Kevin Noon from Rivals of Buckeye Grove. We got Tony Gerdeman down in the corner from the ozone.net and Steve Hellwagon, of course, 247 Sports Bucknuts. How are we doing tonight?
Pretty good.
Good. Good to have you all on board, and hopefully we will get a lot of comments and questions in the live chat, and I will pass them on to our experts, and maybe I'll have something to say as well. Kevin, why don't we start with you in regards to your thoughts coming back, not on the Houston Astros. No. We only have an hour. And, you've got your own YouTube channel there that you can pontificate on the Astros' ills and their evils against the sanctity of baseball. I have things to say about that as well. But we'll talk about Ryan Day and what he had to say wrapping up the season and looking ahead to 2020. Now, of course, I'm sure he said a zillion things that are pretty much the stand pat lines of a head coach following a very successful season and very proud of his team, I'm sure. But anything that stands out as being unique or different?
I don't know if I would say anything was really that unique. A lot of coach speak there. I mean, he did talk about directly after the game about being angry, and he mentioned on Wednesday that the anger is past. But I think that's going to still be compartmentalized and used at the right time there. I found it very interesting when he was asked about Chris Olave. I mean, obviously Chris Olave was the guy that broke off his route on that final drive that ended up leading into the game-sealing interception, and he said that Chris hadn't eaten he didn't eat solid food for a couple of days, it appeared. But the team really rallied around him. I think that the Buckeyes are going to be in good shape going into spring football, as they know what it takes to get to the college football playoff, and now they just have to figure out the next step of being able to clear the hurdle. But it was 40 minutes of really good stuff. There were some laughs. Ryan Day was as light as you would expect at that point, but you know that it still kind of burns at him a little bit, just the way that they kind of went out, and with it being right on the heels of watching the national championship game. And he did mention that he had all of his coaches and players and staff watch it and reflect upon thinking about what it would take for them to get back there and to be able to go further. And I thought that was an important message.
What's on your mind, Tony, after listening to Ryan Day?
Well, I liked what Kevin said, and that was the thing that struck me most, where he basically assigned everybody to watch the game and to let it he says he's not as angry as he was, but you have to figure, like, you watch that game and the anger kind of comes back, I would assume. And so, yeah, that was interesting. We finally got to talk to him about the hire of Corey Dennis as the quarterback's coach, and basically what he told us is that from the day he got off the plane at Ohio State, Corey Dennis was there at the airport waiting for him, basically, and has been his right-hand man ever since. And, it's a pretty important job being quarterback coach at Ohio State. So, yes, this is Corey Dennis's first position job ever, basically, and it's not like Ryan Day would entrust him to that if he didn't think he could do it. And it's a big job, and it's an important job. But he does have Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day to help him out, as Day said yesterday. So, it's good to get his thoughts on that. And, I think I wrote it today, but Corey Dennis has been here longer than every Ohio State assistant except for Tony Alford and Larry Johnson. He's been here since 2015. So he's been around. Ryan Day really wants some continuity. And with Dennis being a young guy, young family, son-in-law of Urban Meyer, there's really no reason for him to go anywhere for a while. And being the quarterback's coach at Ohio State it's a pretty good gig, and you could see somebody doing it for a while. And this will be the first time, Ryan Day said it's been 3 years in a row with somebody new, with Day and 18 and Yurcich this past season. And now Dennis, he wants some continuity there. And you got with Jack Miller and CJ Stroud, the two freshman quarterbacks this year, you would like them to have the same guy throughout their career, at least through the bulk of it. And I think he's going to accomplish that.
What do you think, Steve?
Yeah, I think a lot of the same things those guys said. I think there's a familiarity and a comfortability that Ryan Day has, I would say, with Corey Dennis. And certainly to get your first full-time assistant coaching job at that level, really speaks volumes, although he's kind of been waiting in the wings for the last 3 or 4 years. Like Tony said, and of course he has a background as a former player, he did have that position in the preseason in 2018 and in the 3-game stretch when Ryan Day was the head coach. Ryan Day leaned on him to take over managing the quarterbacks at that time, as he was kind of, treading water there as the head coach in his first time. So I do believe that, when you're in a job like head coach at Ohio State, you look for people that you can rely on. I think the proof will be in the pudding in terms of what Corey Dennis can do in terms of recruiting. The Buckeyes, of course, signed 2 quarterbacks, Stroud and Miller, in this 2020 class, and those guys have enrolled, and they've got another one for 2021, McCord from Pennsylvania. He's lined up right now, and we'll see how Corey Dennis does in building that relationship and making sure that he signs on the dotted line in a year. And, all of us have our recruiting analysts on the various sites, and I see the word quarterback popping up quite a lot. So the Buckeyes are going to continue to recruit quarterbacks to get somebody in there. It's obvious, unless something crazy happens, that this will be Justin Fields' last year at Ohio State. Coming up in 2020, he would be eligible to go to the NFL draft in 2021. And so the race is on right now to become his backup and his successor in 2021. And I think those 2 young guys that we talked about, Stroud and Miller, are going to be added near the top of the list, obviously, in that quest, and bring McCord in as well. So Corey Dennis got a lot on his hands. How do you take a guy with Fields who had whatever his final numbers were, just 3 interceptions for the year, 2 of them coming in that semifinal game? How do you take a guy who had such a great year and have him build on that year? You don't want any slippage. You don't want him to take any steps back. You don't want him to throw, say, 8 interceptions next fall or anything silly like that. So to me, that's a heck of a task in and of itself, is how do you take a guy who achieved at such a high level and try and push him to an even higher level? And, of course, the carrot of playing for the national championship is out there for all of them. So I'm excited to see what he does in this job.
Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. This is our Ohio State Buckeyes live show that we bring you each and every week, this time on a Thursday night at 7 o'clock Eastern time. So not only take in the content yourselves, but let those folks out on social media, friends and family, know that we are here with Tony Gerdeman from the Ozone, Kevin Noon right next to me from Buckeye Grove, and, of course, Steve Hellwagon. And we thank Steve so much for posting these videos on Bucknuts each and every week. I would love to get your take, all of you, on this. So leading into the national championship game, it was my thought that LSU had that collection of games against really good teams, where Clemson had the one game against an elite team that was better than that collection of good teams. So the best data point for comparison was Clemson against Ohio State, of course, and trying to match up and see what Clemson could possibly do against LSU on both sides of the ball, but not knowing, it being just one game, who brought their A game, who brought their B or their C, and just you have to assume that both teams brought their best. Maybe the officials didn't, but both teams brought their best. After seeing the national championship game, Kevin, do you think any differently about how it would have turned out, Ohio State against LSU, than you did a week ago, thinking, hey, this could have been Ohio State and LSU?
I don't know if I thought any differently. I mean, I would have felt that if that game would have happened, it would have been really fun to watch the LSU receivers against the Ohio State secondary. I think at that point there was a little bit of concern still with where Justin Fields' knee would have been at. I think if Ohio State would have gotten past Clemson, there still would have been a lot of issue in terms of being able to for not having that dual threat type of quarterback that Ohio State had been so successful with over the year. But, Ohio State and Clemson was such a close game. I think that Ohio State could have gone into an LSU game and every matchup's different, and we know that everything is about matchups. But I think the Buckeyes definitely could have played them very close as well. I don't know. I haven't allowed myself to, I guess, really arrive at that point yet to play the hypothetical of what that game would have truly looked like in terms of an outcome. But I think that we were really dealing with 3 elite teams in the nation this year, and while we could really mince down on who played what and so on and so forth. Those are the best 3 teams, and any combination of those 3 games I thought those 3 teams would have created some excellent games.
What do you think, Steve?
Oh, I agree with Kevin. I think, man, it would have been one heck of a game. I think where Clemson may have struggled at times guarding the LSU receivers on the perimeter, I think the likes of Wade and Okuda and Arnett would have given LSU a much tougher time. I'm not sure that Joe Burrow throws for 440 yards or 6 touchdowns, whatever it was against Ohio State. I don't know. That's just my first thought. Trevor Lawrence did not play particularly well is another thought. And again, I'm not going to say anything negative about him because it really doesn't. I mean, everyone saw the game. As the game went on, Clemson just couldn't get anything really established. And they were still in the game in the third quarter. I mean, it was still a tight game, but LSU just put them away. And I guess one of my thoughts watching that game was just, I guess, that those 2 teams, LSU and Clemson and Ohio State, those 3 teams in particular, are playing a different game, or at least in 2019, they were a cut above any and everybody else, and they were all playing a different game than the other 127 teams in the country, because I don't think anybody else, and it was borne out, nobody else could stay on the field with any of those 3 teams. So to me, the struggle to put yourself at that upper echelon and the work that goes into perfecting your craft and perfecting your offense and perfecting your defense to the point where people can't touch you and you make it look easy like LSU did. That is a lot of work goes into that. And people are coming out with their 2 early top 25s for next year. And Clemson is picked number 1. I think people, who don't dig too deep, look at it and say they've got Trevor Lawrence, and they did beat Ohio State. At least, the final score was in their favor. But Ohio State played them right down to the wire and also outgained them in the game that they played against one another. And, of course, Ohio State has Justin Fields back. Those 2 schools right now seem to have all the momentum going into 2020 in terms of, I think, again, I haven't looked at every one of these lists. All the major national publications and websites put these lists out. And my inclination, the ones I've seen, is Clemson's 1 and Ohio State's 2, and Ohio State may be 1 in a few of them. And I've thought about doing a little quick survey of that for our website, but I think that's all just born off the fact that they separated themselves. LSU obviously losing Joe Burrow, and I've seen that 7 guys off that team have already declared for the NFL, and maybe a few other ones are going to have to if they took too much money from OBJ there on the sideline after the game and can't pay it back. They're going to have to go pro as well. So, man, I guess one other thought, and I'll just throw this in there and add this to the list of things the playoff has got to get figured out. It's nice having former players down there and whatever, but there's no reason why former players are turning the thing into a spectacle. And if they can't behave, then they're not going to be welcome down there. What he did, let's say Ohio State gets in one day, he may have just killed it for Ezekiel Elliott and everybody else who wants to pal around and be part of that scene down on the sideline, because they can't have that. And they can't have what happened in the locker room with the police officer, and they can't have the smoking cigars and alcohol and these other things. It's just a little bit run amok right now. And I think, all that's got a time and a place. And I think that should be done privately away from the venue, as opposed to, I mean, we didn't see Ohio State carry on like that when they won it in 2014. So that's my first thought is add this to the list of things the playoffs got to get figured out, is proper security, proper protocols. No, we're not going to do that. Put that out. We're not going to do that. If you're going to smoke a cigar, you need to leave the building, get your stuff and go, because we're not going to do that. So, I don't know, just some thoughts. And I know I'm being an old man about it, but there's a time and place for everything.
Tony, thoughts about how this might have played out, especially after you saw LSU handle Clemson, especially in the fourth quarter?
Well, I'll go back to what Ryan Day said. He was asked the same question, how do you think you would have done against LSU? And he just smiled and said it would have been fun. And you could see in his eyes that he really meant it. And I think Ohio State would have matched up better. They have the better corners. They've got 3 corners who can play in the NFL, who will play in the NFL, and I think they would have matched up better. I'm not saying they would have been able to. I don't think you stop LSU's passing game, but I think they would have done better than Clemson. I also think JK and the Ohio State running game would have kept Joe Burrow off the field a little bit more. So that takes maybe a touchdown off the field, off the board there. So I think Ohio State would have had a very good chance to win that game. I don't think my mind changes. Going before the Fiesta Bowl, I felt Clemson or Ohio State had a better shot against Clemson, and Ohio State were both better than LSU. And clearly LSU is better than Clemson. I don't know. Like Ryan Day, it'd be fun to watch because, Ohio State, their secondary calls themselves BIA, best in America. I think they showed very well against Clemson until Sean Wade was kicked out of the game, and it would have been fun to watch against Jamar Chase and Jefferson and those guys, and that defensive line getting after Joe Burrow and seeing how that affects his ability to throw. I mean, Clemson did pretty well early on, but gosh, how do you stop Joe Burrow in that passing game? I think Ohio State would have had a really good chance to slow him down enough, because LSU still has to stop Ohio State's offense. And, as long as JK is on the field, I don't know that anybody could this year.
Currently trending right now is that Dave Aranda has accepted the Baylor job as head coach, defensive coordinator from LSU. Something that Kevin touched upon when in his comments about Ryan Day's postseason comments were about motivation. Do we really think that, whether it's anger, however that emotion was after the game, anger was the one word that Ryan Day used over and over and over directly after the game. Is it possible to fuel that all the way through an off season into a next season and take that in a positive vein and motivate a team that's already got to be highly motivated?
Well, let's go back to 2007. After the 2006 loss to Florida, the 41-14 loss, when after that game, Jim Tressel changed the security code to get into the football facility to 4114. So that was something that the players had to deal with every single day getting into the building. And this is something that I think you need something to fuel you during winter workouts, which they're going through right now. I mean, you need something to fuel you to get up at 5 a.m. and working on mat drills at 6 a.m. and in the weight room and whatnot. So it's, coaches are looking for everything. Ryan Day learned from Urban Meyer, the master sports psychologist and manipulator, who, go back to that 2006 game, was printing out fake Kirk Herbstreit quotes and putting on the walls in the Florida football facility. So, any edge you can get, any type of motivation that can be made and utilized, I think you have to take advantage of it, because these are still, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who can bounce back a little bit quicker than maybe the coaches can. And so sometimes you have to get the kids maybe as motivated as the coaches.
Tony, I'll keep it with you, and everybody else can jump in on this. I think one of the recognizable differences between first and second level play for Ohio State against Clemson was once, and this is no knock on Master Teague, J.K. Dobbins was just Superman out there in the first half before he was limping around, and he sets an all-time record at one of the premier running back schools in history for yardage in a season. But once Master Teague was in there, you just didn't see the explosiveness, the quickness, the cutting ability. You saw power because that's his forte.
Mhm.
What do we think about the running back position minus J.K. Dobbins? Is it going to be up to Ohio State standards, elite status? This is something that Steve and I talked about last week in regards to his evaluation of various units being, okay, Big Ten best or national best, and there might be a difference there.
I think because they have a quarterback who can run, they're still going to be able to run the ball. I think a lot of people after watching that championship game, watching the Clemson game, came away thinking differently maybe than they did about Master Teague beforehand, because this was a guy who at one point, maybe like 8, 9, 10 games into the season, was almost on pace for 1,000 yards, thanks in part to his fourth quarter carries when he's facing a tired defense. And that's something that Ryan Day said yesterday. This is a guy who built most of his stats against tired defenses and never got an opportunity really to face tough defenses in the first quarter. And really, when you've got J.K. Dobbins, there's not much need to put somebody else in there. But yeah, he didn't, and the same thing against Michigan, really, where there's not, we know he's explosive. He's the fastest back on the team, biggest back on the team. But the vision and the shake and the make you miss, there really wasn't there against the best defenses. And that's why, he has, almost 800 yards rushing this season. But I think the job is wide open. He's the best bet to win the job. But Marcus Crowley, we'll see how whether he's good to go this spring after his knee injury. But will it be to Ohio State standards? I don't know. The standards fluctuate. 2018, the running game wasn't to Ohio State standards, and that was J.K. Dobbins. Could it be a 2016 with Mike Weber and Curtis Samuel, something like that, or 2015 with I don't think we'll be on the Ezekiel Elliott, J.K. Dobbins level, but I think there's enough there to get the job done, especially in the Big Ten.
Yeah, 2018 J.K. Dobbins was not 2019 J.K. Dobbins or 2017 J.K. Dobbins. So, I think that there's an off season and a maturation process that Master T can go through. Having that, the best opportunity to take that job. I mean, nothing has been given to anybody at this point with, a stable of other running backs, Mayan Williams coming in as a true freshman as well. I think Master will end up locking down the job if I just had to put on, my Swami hat and think about it a little bit and make my prediction there. Is he going to? We were spoiled this year with what J.K. Dobbins was able to do. 2,003 yards, all the scores, everything else. I mean, he really came out and was next level at this point. I think that in most seasons he ends up winning the Doak Walker. He ends up going to New York for the Heisman ceremony. He gets a lot more he ends up walking away with more than just the Earl Campbell. What is it? The Earl Campbell Tyler
Rose,
who's Whataburger or whatever it is for Texas high school player. I think I think Master Teague with the complementary part, obviously, of Justin Fields being able to run the ball, and with them having a little bit more depth at quarterback with the true freshman out there, and probably being a little bit more willing to run Justin Fields, I think the running game will be fine. I don't think it's going to be nearly as explosive as it was this year, but I don't think we're going to see a regression back to 2018, which is really more of a product of having a pass first, pass second type of offense.
I made a comment that I thought Teague was kind of a plotter, and he's listed here at 5'11", 220, and people corrected me on our site and said, no, he's a 4'4" guy. People even tried to invoke 4'3", and I'm like, guys, I go to the combine. They run like four guys out of 400 people will run a 4'3". So don't come at me with that. He's not that fast. He didn't show that he was that fast, but I think he's got tremendous potential. And I think what Mick Marotti and Tony Alford will do is they will mold him like a piece of clay into the exact weight and the metrics and everything they want him to be going into the season. And I think another thing that people don't think about is, okay, he was the change-up back. When they were ahead 21-0 in the second quarter, they could throw him in there for a series or two, and he could get 5 or 6 carries. And then in the second half, when they're up 38-3, they could throw him in there for a couple of series and he could get 5 or 6 more carries. That's a lot different than being like J.K. Dobbins was this year, where they're counting on you to carry the ball 20 to 25 times against the opposing team's top defense. And I think that is going to be a tremendous step up for Master Teague. Like one of the guys that we work with joked, it's really easy to run over Indiana when they're down 40 points. And I think about he had over 800 yards, which is impressive for a guy who was the backup. They threw in Marcus Crowley. It looks like he played 7 games, 237 yards, averaged almost 10 yards a carry. That's very impressive for Marcus Crowley in terms of what he was able to do this year. 6'1", 205. And then the other one that played quite a bit was Steel Chambers. He played in 4 games, so I guess that means he preserves his red shirt, and had 135 yards and a touchdown, average 7 yards a game, or 7 yards a carry, 6'1", 215. So they've all got, they're in that 200 to 220 range, which is what you want in the Big Ten, durable guys. And now we're going to really drill down and see who can catch the ball out of the backfield, who can pass protect, who can take a licking and come back and avoid injuries and those kind of things, because they're going to get put through the test this spring. And then you're bringing in Mayan Williams, and he is a plotter from Cincinnati Winton Woods. He's a guy who had a lot of yards in high school. Team had a lot of success, and he was an Iowa State commit who flipped to Ohio State right before the first signing period. So you add him in, and of course you still got DeMario McCall. If all else fails, you can always go back to Old Faithful DeMario McCall. He's in his 26th year at Ohio State coming up. And even Jalen Gill has some running back tendencies as well. Didn't get to play a whole lot after he fumbled a couple times early in the season, and they kind of sat him over there in the corner of the bench over there, a ways away from the. I want the guys who have played up front. Everyone else over here. He was over there. So had several guys on this offense that were in that predicament this year. And so I'm interested to see getting into spring football, what they do with Teague to kind of reform him and bring those other guys along. And I think there's plenty there. Jahmyr Gibbs, outstanding running back out of Georgia, was supposed to visit this weekend. He's still kind of on the aftermarket for the second signing period, but Ohio State canceled his visit. Ryan Day said yesterday he did not envision signing another running back. I think the stark reality of his scholarship situation is starting to set in a little bit for Ryan Day, that it's going to be maybe a little bit more difficult than he thought, clearing some cap space to add Gibbs. Now I say that maybe they got their eye on another running back, the kid who Evans was it that didn't end up going to Georgia, I guess. But I don't know. So we'll see what happens. But any rate, I'd say cautiously optimistic about running backs going into 2020. And the good news is you got the quarterback who should be able to run the ball himself if his knee is healthy, and you know he's going to be able to throw it all over the lot.
Steve, Indiana won 8 games this year. I thought they earned their way out of punchline category status there.
Well, they did. They did. The score of that game was 51-10, though. So
yeah, it was.
That was maybe their Waterloo that day back in September. After that, I give them credit. You get stomped like that in week 3, and you come back and still win games the way that they did to pull games out. You got to be pretty happy with their season, and doggone it, they could have held on to that. I mean, 13-point lead, I believe it was, over Tennessee with 5 minutes to go, and they blew it. Boy, you talk about managing a game and different things like that. How in God's name do you not have the hands team in there to receive a potential onside kick once Tennessee scored to get that thing down to 6 or whatever it was? So, yeah, I think Tom Allen, he learned some valuable lessons this year, no doubt.
they're still not well versed in onside kick defense protection. They're used to executing the onside kick, but they're at Indiana, but they're not used to defending the onside kick. They're still working on prosperity there at Indiana. So I'll remind you guys that as Kyle Pickett is reminding us here with a post on the screen, that while it's fun to talk Ohio State football, the real reason we're here is for my 2020 vice presidential campaign that Kyle has put me on for many months now. He just reminds us of that constantly. So that's much appreciated there, Kyle. All right, we got Tony Gerdeman on the line from the Ozone, Kevin Noon from Rivals, Buckeye Grove, and of course Steve Hillwagon from Bucknuts of 247 Sports, talking Ohio State football. The super chats available to you to help us support the channel. Guys, I'm going to make one statement about the linebackers, and that would be that while they certainly tightened up the assignments, we didn't see the miscues, we didn't see the flailing in empty space, those sorts of things. Maybe when it came right down to it, athletically, they still weren't where they needed to be against an elite back against an elite team. Is that fair to say?
Good enough to get you to that point, not good enough to win that game. And it's unfortunate because Ohio State did a phenomenal job stopping the run with Travis Etienne, did not give him running lanes. There was no traditional running game by Clemson. They had to resort to the quarterback running game, and wow, was he amazing, Lawrence. And then getting the ball to ATN as a pass receiver. I'm just looking here. ATN caught 29 passes all season. That's roughly 2.5 a game. And boy, did he really make a statement in that game once he got the ball in the open field. Couple of long touchdowns. So Clemson, you have to give them 100% credit for winning the game by finding alternate ways to attack Ohio State's defense. And as I said on our show that you and I did, Mark, Clemson eventually found them. And that's somewhat of a misnomer because on a couple of those big plays, Ohio State was in its nickel defense. Sean Wade had been removed from the game, and they actually had Amir Reep and maybe another defensive back on the field. And at least one or two of those plays, Proctor was playing as well as Fuller on some of those plays at safety. So it was not entirely the linebackers. They found the safeties to a degree as well with a couple of those big hitters. But Malik Harrison was almost exclusively a pass rusher on a couple of those plays. He kind of got lost in the lost isn't even the word. His assignment was not to take a back out in the flat. His assignment was to find a way to spy Trevor Lawrence. And then Browning kind of just got caught up in the afterwash there. And if you watch the film room with Jeff Hafley, he went through several of those big plays, and he readily admitted that the hope when they hit a play like that is that you funnel it from one to one another and you limit the gain to 5 or 10 or 15 yards. Well, there was no funneling. They got caught off guard. And obviously on the one play, 41 Proctor slipped, had Lawrence in his sights, and he slipped. So give Clemson 100% credit. They won the game by finding alternate ways to attack Ohio State's defense. And some of it was linebackers, some of it safeties, some of it scheme. I will say this, on the winning touchdown drive, Trevor Lawrence made an amazing play. He looked to his left for the longest time and then hit a guy on a crossing route going back the other way, and Okuda missed the tackle after about 15 yards, and he was off down the sideline for about a 30-yard gain. And that play helped set up the winning touchdown, obviously. Had Wade been in the game, I wonder in that situation if they would have not been in that type of a zone situation. Maybe they would have been in some kind of a different coverage, and Lawrence took full advantage of that. And, again, they made plays, and I'm not going to sit here and boo-hoo, if the refs had done this or whatever. Clemson had more points at the end of the day and, made a couple more plays than Ohio State did.
Hey guys, as always, if you've got better comments to make, better questions for each other, you guys just dive right in. I'm just monitoring and trying to spur on the conversation, but you guys certainly take it in whatever direction you think is most interesting. To Steve's point about Clemson having to manufacture ways to produce offense, I did think it was noticeable watching Clemson and LSU that a Clemson offensive line that could not move the Ohio State defensive front could move the LSU defensive front down the field. They just got behind, but Etienne had running lanes. He was knocking guys down. They were having trouble tackling him. He just wasn't doing that against Ohio State as a runner out of the backfield. He was being tackled in that spot. He was dragging guys all over the field against LSU.
As Gerd and I are staring at each other, see who's going to jump. I guess I'll jump on it. We talk about Ohio State's secondary, but let's not sleep on LSU's secondary. Grant Delpit, Stingley Jr. I mean, they had some dudes there. I think that the weakness of the LSU defense. Well, first of all, I think that the LSU defense, while much maligned, probably wasn't on par with Ohio State or Clemson's defense. And they did get exposed a little bit there. They did have some issues. They did get Michael Divinity back in the linebacker position, and he was a huge addition, but he hadn't played in 6 weeks or something along those lines. And, I think Clemson certainly was happy to go against that defense in that game rather than going against an Ohio State type of defense the second time around. And, they were able to do some things that were a little bit more toward their traditional attack. They had to, as Steve had mentioned, had to find some alternative ways of moving the ball against the Buckeyes. They were able to kind of line up and do what they did. And let's not forget, Clemson was winning early in the game. LSU was squandering some opportunities and whatnot. But then once Joe Burrow kind of locked into position and started to find his guys, it really didn't matter at that point. But I think Travis Etienne had a tremendous game against them, and just was one of those situations.
I do think it was interesting that LSU was able to do this without running the ball until the fourth quarter when they were just trying to run the clock out. And you think, like we hear Urban Meyer talk for years about you have to be balanced. And LSU, I think, proved as long as you have the best receivers in the nation and the best quarterback, you don't necessarily need to be all that balanced as long as your defense is okay and your passing game is amazing. And they have a very good running back. It's just I think there were maybe like 13 rushes in the first 3 quarters for LSU compared to like 45 passes. So it was interesting just to see a one-dimensional offense have such success. And you listen to the Ohio State coaches talk for years and years about how you want to play a one-dimensional offense, and that's what they would have gotten against LSU, and that's not what LSU would have gotten against Ohio State. So I still think I think Ohio State would have been a better matchup for LSU, but again, I don't bet against Joe Burrow.
I'd like to address the comment made by Joe Catter that I've posted to the screen. He says, Ohio State is by far the most overrated team consistently year after year.
Okay. It's an overrated poster on this chat.
What was that, Kevin? I didn't quite get that.
He must be the most overrated poster on this chat because that's just absurd. We know that would be Notre Dame.
Yeah. Well, so I made a list of teams right here, Joe. Very quickly here, Joe, come on. Go back to the preseason AP poll. And then go to the postseason AP poll. Just go year by year by year by year. Ohio State, we'll exclude 2011. Just follow me here. Let's go back to about 2005. They're averaging like 1.5 losses per year. It's difficult to be overrated much when you're averaging 1.5 losses per year, as opposed to look at Michigan's preseason, postseason poll rankings year after year. Notre Dame, preseason, post. Texas, preseason, postseason. And before this season, LSU, preseason, postseason. They've been losing 3 to 4 games for the last 8 years, and we can throw USC in there as well.
I will throw in this week when Ohio State finished number 3 in the poll. This was the 13th time in the last 20 years Ohio State has been in the top 5 in the final AP poll after the playoff, after the BCS, after the bowl games. Next up on the list is Oklahoma with 9, USC with 8, Alabama with 8, all of those just in the last 9 or 10 years. And they weren't in the top 5 this year, Alabama, after the season was over. Clemson 5 times, all in the last 5 years. Georgia 5 times. Texas 5 times. LSU 5 times. Anybody who I didn't mention is overrated.
Since what year is this, Steve?
Since 2000.
Okay.
13 times in 20 years, Ohio State has finished in the top 5.
Okay.
And I just gave you the list of the leaders in that category. Anybody, any school, if you're a fan of any school I didn't mention, your school's overrated.
And USC's run stopped in 2008.
Yeah, they haven't been any good this decade. So,
all right. If you have any comments or questions and want to be attacked like Mr. Joe Catter, Joe, we appreciate you joining the live chat, certainly. But just be careful what you post, because it may not necessarily make sense. So we appreciate the comments and the questions, and we will address as many as you would like to bring us. Certainly. But the getting back to the linebackers, still I hate to pick on them because there's got to be a weakest unit. It's just there just has to be a weakest unit, and not every unit can be elite, nor does it have to be elite for you to have an elite team. Not everything's going to be a grade 9.5 out of 10. But that was still the weakest unit of the offense and the defense, correct?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't. You mentioned like a lack of athleticism or whatever, and I don't know that I agree with that. But yeah, like even Baron Browning, who's probably the incredible athlete at middle linebacker, was one of the issues that Ohio State had this, in the playoffs. He was out of position, and that wasn't necessarily a new thing. But he's also a guy who will run into 4.5s, did it in high school, and is 6'4", 240 pounds, whatever. He's what you want your linebackers to look like. But if you're out of position or you miss a tackle, then it doesn't matter if you run a 4.3, basically. And so this was the first year for Al Washington at Ohio State linebackers coach. Everybody is back except for Malik Harrison. I'll be interested to see what happens. They had Tough Borland and Baron Browning splitting carries or splitting reps this season, and I'll be interested to see will Browning then move over to the Will where Malik Harrison was, and do they both play? And there's some young guys behind them who are going to be juniors this year who have been just sitting and waiting and playing a little bit here and there, and those guys all need to play as well. And I'll be interested to see how it shakes out. I know Buckeye fans give Tough Borland a lot of grief, and they don't really seem to do the same for Baron Browning, who gets his mistakes excused. And I know that there's some that have the same issues with Pete Warner. They're overly critical of him, and I think you listen to the coaches, and they won't say anything bad about Pete Warner because he's never done anything bad in their eyes, and they're very effusive in their praise of him. So I think he's going to be the Sam again. What happens with the bullet? Is that still? Is there a need for a bullet until Pete Warner is gone? They had that. They brought it in. They created it this year, and Pete Warner's ability to do everything they needed eliminated that bullet spot. And now, you saw Brendan White transfer out because that was his job, and he didn't get to play, so he left. And I think there's a lot of questions at linebacker, even though they only lose one guy. There's a lot of guys there, and they all want to play. And you've got, oh gosh, I don't know, probably 8 or 9 high school All-Americans in that room, and they can't afford to be a weak link anymore. And like you said, somebody has to be. I don't think they were a bad group, but what other group are you going to take advantage of in that defense this year?
Yeah, I'll just throw in a quick comment. I think you guys have laid it out pretty well that I think the 3 seniors may get the first call the first week of the season. But the issue is they're going into their senior season, And I don't mean to be harsh or anything. Al Washington didn't recruit those guys. Ryan Day really didn't recruit those guys. There's no special allegiance or affinity for playing a guy just because he's a senior. I think all bets are off. I think the best three guys are going to play. Kevon Pope, if he's one of them, Taraja Mitchell, if he's one of them, Dallas Gant is going to be given a shot. Tommy Eichenberg redshirted this past year. He's going to be given a shot. Cade Stover sounds like we'll move from linebacker to defensive end perhaps, but otherwise you're too deep at all three positions. Just a matter of how they align them in the spring and how Al Washington and Greg Madison and whoever, we assume Kerry Combs is coming when and if the Titans ever lose a game in these playoffs. However they set them up, that's how it's going to go. And it's my fervent belief and hope that they come up with packages for Mitchell and Pope and Gant to get on the field. And let's see what these guys can do. We know what the other guys can do. Good enough to win the Big Ten. Good enough to win the Big Ten. Good enough to get you into the playoff. To beat a Clemson, to beat an Alabama next year, to beat a Georgia, whoever elevates, whoever comes into this, you can't even foresee the future, who it might be, but it'll be a great team. Michigan. Are they good enough to win that game?
True enough. It has not been enough for other teams to knock off Ohio State off the top of the number one spot in the Big Ten. For the most part, of course, we've had our Michigan State and Penn State years, but this has been going on for quite some time, and so Ohio State has ruled the Big Ten. We appreciate everybody stopping by for Ohio State Buckeyes Live. Kevin Noon, he is right next to me in the top box. Please join him on Buckeye Grove on Rivals. Tony Gerdeman from the Ozone.net, and of course, Steve Hellwagon from 247 Sports Bucknuts. Is there anything else we need to cover tonight?
I would agree with Clemson alum 98. LSU is going to be heading back to earth. Lose Joe Burrow, lose Joe Bradley, Dave Aranda, and now you're left with Ed Orgeron, who, the nicest guy in the world, but we'll see. I think a lot of head coaches could have won a national title with this offense and Dave Aranda and Joe Bradley and Joe Burrow, and so we'll see. I think the recruiting has to pick up. The everything's going to have to pick up to maintain some semblance of control in the SEC West, and maybe it will, but I certainly don't expect it to be at this level, and it needed to be at this level to get the job done.
I know I was fielding. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was going to say I wouldn't sell all my stock in LSU yet, but I would sell a good number of it and wait and see what their replacements are going to be at this point. Does Corey Raymond move into a larger role on the defensive side? I mean, are you rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic when you do that? We saw that happen in East Lansing. I mean, Corey Raymond it's much more well regarded than some of the offensive coaches at Michigan State, to be honest. But I think it's going to be really interesting to watch here in the silly season to see what they do with these coordinator changes that they're going to have to make, because the reason LSU made such a leap forward because their offense was stuck 40 years in the past. It was the set of Brigadoon. It was terrible. I mean, it was definite old school.
I will just throw in that I'm an extremely old person. I'm going to be 52 in February, and I still have to have my monthly planner, so I finally broke down and went to Staples and got that here yesterday. I'm 2 weeks late, and I'm filling in the dates for the Ohio State games in the fall. And it's notable that they're going to play at Oregon, which we've talked a little bit about, on Saturday, September the 12th. And probably could do a deeper dive on Oregon and their future opponents at another time. But that's an interesting game. Oregon was a top 10 team for a part of the year. And certainly the schools have a lot of history, having just played for the national championship 5 years ago. But one thing I noticed on this schedule, this October has got the makings of something that could be a little torturous. They're Iowa at home on October the 10th, at Michigan State on October the 17th, and we know obviously they're kind of stuck in the mud up there right now in terms of offense. At Penn State, then 1 week later, and that'll be a night game whiteout probably on October the 24th. Some conjecture there if Fox has the rights and they have the World Series, but maybe I don't know non-conference. ABC with that second pick has always taken that Michigan Notre Dame game, and there's nothing like that on the schedule. Maybe Ohio State Penn State is the number 2 game, and ABC gets that, and it's a nighttime game on the 24th in spite of the World Series on Fox. And then Nebraska back at home for Ohio State on October the 31st. And, Frost, if you could put, Nebraska's offense with Michigan State's defense, my God, you'd have something. You'd have a team that would win 10 games, I think. But, both of them as constituted right now are 5 and 6 win teams. But the making is there. That's probably the toughest 4-game stretch. And then you flip it over, and November looks pretty good. You're sailing pretty good. Indiana at home, at Maryland, at Illinois, teams you should beat. And then November 28th, the big one with Michigan again. And here was a stat somebody sent me that in 5 years as the coach at Michigan, and this would take in probably 65, 70 games, only 5 times has Jim Harbaugh started a quarterback he recruited out of high school at Michigan. Only 5 times in 5 years. Obviously, you think that's going to change perhaps in 2020. But I just saw they lost another assistant coach, to the NFL. So, and I don't know, they're having a heck of a time up there. And the good news just doesn't, you don't hear a lot of, boy, we made a stride in this direction today. You still don't hear it, and wonder if you ever will.
No,
the point of, go ahead, Tony.
Michigan replacing coaches with, I think, one like assistant strength coach is now a position coach, and they're bringing in another coach, and neither are, one has no experience recruiting, the other has plenty of experience, and he's not a very good recruiter.
Yeah, so they brought in Bob Shoop from Mississippi State. I believe he had a stop at Penn State. It sounds familiar. So
yes,
I don't know a lot about him.
I don't think the fans are too happy about it. And I think one of the things Michigan needs is better recruiters, and they lost 2 of their best. And the guys you just mentioned, including the Partridge or whoever they got from the New Jersey high school who left. But yeah, the lack of recruiting is going to continue to kill Michigan, and that's they don't have the base, the in-state base to just rely on that. And as their name begins to continue to kind of dwindle, that national scope isn't there either. And to not replace good recruiters with better recruiters, I think is a huge mistake.
There you have it, folks. Ohio State Buckeyes live another week. It's week 34 here, and our post-mortem of the college football season. Of course, the Buckeyes finishing at 13-1, number 3 in the country behind LSU and Clemson. Please join Steve Hellwagon on Bucknuts 247 Sports, Tony Gerdeman on the Ozone, and Kevin Noon on Rivals platform for Ohio State football. That would be Buckeye Grove. Guys, we appreciate the discussion each and every week. You guys taking time out of your busy schedules to join us to talk up the Buckeyes.
Anytime.
Okay, Mark.
Thanks for having me.